Welcome to Mythic Mundi. The ocean is a vast and unforgiving wilderness. It holds wonders beyond our imagination, but it also keeps secrets. Of all the stories of the sea, none are more persistent, more complete, or more baffling than that of the Mary Celeste. It is the quintessential ghost ship, a vessel found perfectly adrift, sailing silently toward the horizon with no one at the helm. A ship in pristine condition, its cargo untouched, its sails set, but its crew, its captain, his wife, and his young daughter had vanished. Not a single soul was left behind. This isn't just a sailor's yarn, it is a documented historical event, a maritime mystery that has baffled investigators, historians, and storytellers for over 150 years. What happened to the 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste? Why would they abandon a perfectly sound ship in the middle of the Atlantic? And where did they go? Join us as we set sail into the heart of the ocean's greatest unsolved case.
Our story begins on December 4th, 1872. The place, the vast empty expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. A Canadian brigantine, the Dei Gratia, was cutting through the water on its own journey to Gibraltar. Its captain, David Morehouse, was an experienced mariner. Through his spyglass, he spotted something unusual. Another ship, about 5 miles distant, was behaving erratically. The ship's sails were partially set, but were tattered, as if they had been battered by a storm, yet the weather was clear. The vessel was yawing in the wind, drifting aimlessly. It flew no distress signals. It answered no hails. As the Dei Gratia drew closer, a cold realization settled upon Captain Morehouse. He recognized the ship. It was the Mary Celeste. This was more than a passing coincidence. Captain Morehouse knew the captain of the Mary Celeste, Benjamin Briggs. They were friends. They had even reportedly had dinner together in New York just before their respective voyages began. Alarmed, Morehouse ordered his chief mate, Oliver Deveau, to lead a boarding party. When Deveau and his men swung aboard the Mary Celeste, they were met not with chaos or violence, but with a profound and unsettling silence. The ship was empty, utterly empty. The scene they discovered was not one of panic, but of sudden, inexplicable absence. It was as if the crew had been lifted away by an invisible hand. The ship was in remarkably good condition. It was wet, with about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, but this was not unusual for a ship of its size and construction. It was certainly not sinking. Her pumps were found to be in working order. In the captain's cabin, the boarding party found the personal belongings of Captain Briggs and his family left just as they were. Clothes were neatly folded. Toys belonging to his 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, were scattered on the bunk. There was a sewing machine with a piece of work still in it, and a small harmonium organ, which his wife Sarah was known to play. In the galley, or the ship's kitchen, there was ample food and fresh water, enough for 6 months. There were no signs of a fire or a struggle. In the crew's quarters, their sea chests were still there, containing their belongings, and in some cases their wages. Valuables were left untouched. The ship's cargo was almost entirely intact. She was carrying 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol destined for Genoa, Italy. When the cargo was later unloaded, only 9 of these barrels were found to be empty. This is where the mystery deepens. What was missing? First, and most obviously, all 10 people. Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, his daughter Sophia, and the 7 experienced crewmen. All gone. Second, the ship's single lifeboat was missing. This strongly suggested the crew had evacuated the ship. But why? Third, the ship's navigational instruments were gone. The sextant and the chronometer, tools essential for knowing a ship's location, were not in their places. Fourth, the ship's papers and register were missing, though strangely, the captain's logbook was left behind. The final entry in that logbook was dated November 25th, 10 days before the ship was found. The entry was routine. It recorded the ship's position just off the Azores island of Santa Maria. There was no mention of distress, no storm, no panic, nothing. So, the crew of the Dei Gratia was faced with a riddle. A perfectly sound ship, a valuable cargo, plentiful supplies, and a missing crew that seemingly had taken the time to gather navigational tools and official papers before leaving in a small lifeboat. Captain Morehouse and his men were seamen. They understood the risks of the ocean. You do not abandon your ship unless the alternative is even worse. The ship is your only sanctuary in the vastness of the sea. To leave it, especially in a small, fragile lifeboat, is an act of last resort. Yet, the Mary Celeste was not sinking. It was not on fire. It had not been ransacked by pirates. It was, for all intents and purposes, a perfectly good vessel. Captain Morehouse made a decision. He split his crew, placing some of his own men on the Mary Celeste to sail it alongside the Dei Gratia to Gibraltar, where they would claim the salvage rights. But as they sailed, the empty ship beside them must have felt like a phantom, a floating tomb holding a secret it would not tell. When they arrived in Gibraltar, the mystery only intensified. The Vice Admiralty Court convened a salvage hearing, but the proceedings quickly turned into an investigation. The Attorney General of Gibraltar, a man named Frederick Sully Flood, was immediately suspicious. He simply could not accept that a crew would abandon a ship for no reason. He believed foul play was the only answer. But the more he investigated, the more puzzling the case became.
To understand what might have happened, we must first understand who was lost. These were not phantoms. They were real people, with families, histories, and plans for the future. The Mary Celeste itself had a curious history. It was launched in 1861 in Nova Scotia under the name Amazon. Its early life was marked by misfortune. Its first captain fell ill and passed away on its maiden voyage. It subsequently survived collisions and ran aground. By 1872, it had been salvaged, resold, and refitted by its new American owners, who renamed it Mary Celeste. She was considered a sturdy and reliable vessel. Her captain for this voyage was Benjamin Briggs. He was 37 years old, a highly respected and experienced mariner. He was known as a devout, temperate man and a skilled navigator. This was a man at the peak of his career, a partial owner of the very ship he commanded. He was not alone. Captain Briggs had decided to bring his family with him on what should have been a pleasant trip to the Mediterranean. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, was 30 years old. She was by all accounts a beloved figure, and her letters, which were later recovered, paint a picture of a happy and domestic life at sea. With them was their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda. A child's presence on board makes the ship's abandonment even more poignant and difficult to comprehend. The Briggs' other child, their 7-year-old son, Arthur, had been left behind in Massachusetts to attend school, a decision that would inadvertently save his life. The crew consisted of 7 men. The first mate, Albert Richardson, was also an American and a personal friend of Captain Briggs. The rest of the people, as they were called in the maritime language of the day, were 4 German sailors and a Danish cook. All were experienced with good records. There was no indication of incompetence or rebellious tendencies among them. This was, by all accounts, a good ship with a good captain and a good crew. On November 7, 1872, the Mary Celeste cast off its lines in New York Harbor, loaded with its cargo of industrial alcohol. The weather was fair. Sarah Briggs wrote a letter to her mother-in-law just before they set sail, full of optimism. She described her cabin as a picture and wrote of her husband's pride in the vessel. For the first 2 weeks, the voyage seems to have been unremarkable. We know from the ship's log that they encountered some heavy weather, which is normal for a November crossing of the North Atlantic, but Captain Briggs was more than capable of handling it. The last log entry, as we know, was on November 25th. It noted their position and the weather. Nothing else. After the ship was recovered, investigators looked for any clue, any hint of what was to come. They found a letter from Sarah Briggs to her mother, written from the ship. It was found in her cabin. In it, she spoke lovingly of her daughter Sophia, how she was enjoying the voyage and how she entertained the crew. She wrote, "Sophia is well and enjoys the voyage. She is a great pet with all the people." The letter is filled with the mundane, happy details of a family at sea. It is a snapshot of a normal life, frozen in time just before the unexplained end. This is the human element that makes the Mary Celeste so haunting. A captain, his family, and a professional crew, sailing a sound ship. They had food, water, and a valuable cargo. They were on a routine journey. And then, sometime after 8 a.m. on November 25th, they vanished from the face of the earth. This brings us back to the court in Gibraltar. Attorney General Solly Flood was a man who did not believe in mysteries. He believed in culprits. He was convinced that the Mary Celeste was the scene of a terrible crime. He seized on several small, ambiguous clues. He found a sword in the captain's cabin that had a small stain on it. He ordered it to be tested, believing it to be blood from a violent struggle. The test, however, revealed it was not blood, but most likely rust or polish. He noted deep cuts in the ship's railing, which he claimed were made by a sharp instrument, evidence of a fight. Experienced sailors later testified these were common marks on a ship this old, likely from heavy equipment or rough seas. Solly Flood's primary theory was mutiny. He theorized that the crew, perhaps under the influence of the alcohol they were transporting, had risen up and dispatched the captain and his family. Then, in a fit of remorse or panic, they fled in the lifeboat. But this theory made no sense. Why would they? There was no evidence of a struggle. Captain Briggs was a fair man. The crew's belongings were still on board. Mutineers would certainly have taken their pay, and if they had seized the ship, why abandon it? They could have sailed it anywhere and sold the cargo. Then he spun even a darker theory. He accused Captain Morehouse and the crew of De Gratia of foul play. He suggested that Morehouse, knowing the ship and its cargo, had ambitioned the Mary Celeste, eliminated everyone on board, and then sailed both ships to Gibraltar to claim a fraudulent salvage award. This, too, collapsed under scrutiny. The De Gratia had left New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste. For it to have caught up, sailed with it to the point of abandonment, and then waited 10 days before discovering it, all in a conspiracy, was logistically absurd. The salvage hearings ended with no answers. The court, frustrated by Solly Flood's baseless accusations, eventually awarded the De Gratia crew their salvage money, but it was a pittance, only about 1/6 of the ship and cargo's total value. It was as if the court itself was punishing them for the mystery they had presented. The official inquiry was closed, but the world's fascination was just beginning. If it wasn't pirates and it wasn't mutiny, what else could it be?
With the official investigation at a dead end, the Mary Celeste sailed out of the courtroom and into the realm of legend. The public and the press needed an answer, and where facts are scarce, speculation thrives. The theories about the ship's fate range from the highly practical to the truly fantastic. Let's explore them, starting with the most dramatic. One popular theory involved a natural disaster of spectacular proportions. Could a sea quake, an underwater earthquake, have struck? Such an event could violently shake the ship, perhaps damaging the hull in a way that wasn't immediately obvious and frightening the crew into abandoning it. It's possible, but there were no reports of such activity in the area at the time. What about a rogue wave? A colossal wall of water that could have swamped the deck, damaged the lifeboat, and washed everyone overboard. This is certainly a known peril of the sea. However, it doesn't quite fit the evidence. The ship was found with its cabins and galley in relative order. A wave of that magnitude would have caused far more destructive chaos inside the ship. Furthermore, it doesn't explain why the navigational instruments and ship's papers were taken. Then there are the more imaginative theories. Stories of a giant squid or a sea monster rising from the depths and plucking the crew from the deck one by one. These make for thrilling tales, but they leave no evidence and belong squarely in the world of folklore. In the 20th century, new theories emerged. Some suggested the Mary Celeste had sailed into a Bermuda Triangle-style anomaly, even though it was thousands of miles from the Caribbean. Others, in the age of science fiction, proposed alien abduction as the only explanation for a crew vanishing without a trace. But perhaps the most famous explanation for the Mary Celeste was in fact a complete work of fiction. In 1884, a young writer named Arthur Conan Doyle, years before he would create Sherlock Holmes, published an anonymous short story titled J. Habakkuk Jephson's Statement. It was a fictionalized account of a ship called the Mary Celeste. In Doyle's story, the ship is taken over by a mutinous passenger bent on revenge. This story was a sensation. It was so vividly written that many readers mistook it for a true account from a survivor. Doyle's fiction is the source of many of the most popular facts about the Mary Celeste, myths that persist to this day. The idea that meals were found still warm on the table, that tea was still steeping in the pot, that a chicken was roasting in the galley, none of that is true. That was all the invention of Arthur Conan Doyle. The ship had been abandoned for 10 days. Any food left out would have long been cold. But the real mystery is more compelling than any fiction, and to find the most plausible solution, we must return to the facts. We must return to the cargo. The most logical and widely accepted theory today centers on those 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol. Remember, the ship was found with over 3 feet of water in the hold, which was not considered a dangerous amount. But why was it there? And why were 9 of the 1,701 barrels of alcohol empty? This theory, sometimes called the fuming alcohol theory, paints a very plausible scenario. Denatured alcohol is volatile. It can release a flammable and explosive vapor. The Mary Celeste had previously carried coal, and the holds were likely still coated in coal dust. The 1,700 wooden barrels were stored in this enclosed space. As the ship sailed from the cold of New York into the warmer, milder climate near the Azores, The temperature change could have caused the alcohol in the barrels to expand and release vapor. 9 of the barrels, as we know, were later found empty. They were made of a different wood than the others, which may have been more porous. It's believed these barrels began to leak heavily. The hold would have slowly filled with a volatile, invisible cloud of alcohol vapor. Now, imagine you are Captain Briggs. You smell these fumes. You are responsible for your ship, your crew, and your family. You order the main hatch to be opened to ventilate the hold. This is where the catastrophe may have happened. With the hatch open, the mixture of air and vapor could have reached a critical point. It doesn't need a lit match. It could have been sparked by 2 metal tools striking each other, or even static electricity. The result would not have been a massive, ship-destroying fire. Instead, it would have been a vapor explosion, a dramatic, terrifying whoosh of pressure and flame. A burst of blue fire would have shot out of the open hatch, powerful enough to blow the heavy hatch cover off its hinges, which was indeed found in an unusual position on deck. To the people on board, it would have looked like the ship was about to erupt in a fiery inferno. In this moment of perceived crisis, Captain Briggs would have had to make an instant decision. He would not risk his family. He believes his ship is a ticking time bomb about to explode. He orders an immediate precautionary evacuation. This explains everything. He shouts the order, "Into the lifeboat!" In the rush, they grab only the most essential items for survival if they are stranded: the ship's papers, the chronometer, and the sextant. They don't take personal belongings, food, or water because they don't intend to be gone for long. Their plan is likely to trail the Mary Celeste from a safe distance in the lifeboat attached by a long tow rope. They will wait to see if the ship explodes. If it doesn't, they will simply reboard once the danger has passed. This is a logical, seaman-like decision under extreme duress. So, 10 people huddle in a small lifeboat watching their ship. But the Atlantic is unpredictable. A sudden squall could have blown up, a large wave could have struck, or the tow rope itself, perhaps damaged in the initial vapor burst or hastily tied, simply snaps. And just like that, they are separated. The Mary Celeste, a sturdy, well-built ship, having relieved its internal pressure, is unharmed. It catches the wind, and as if guided by a phantom hand, it sails on. It continues its journey, empty, silent, carrying its mystery with it. And the lifeboat? A tiny, fragile craft overloaded with 10 people in the middle of the Atlantic, it would not have stood a chance. It and everyone in it would have been lost to the next storm, sinking without a trace. This theory is the most complete. It accounts for the missing lifeboat, the missing instruments, the lack of panic, the intact cargo, the minimal water in the hold, and the slightly displaced hatch. It explains why a good captain and a good crew would abandon a good ship. They didn't want to. They were tricked by their own cargo into thinking their ship was doomed. As for the Mary Celeste herself, her story did not end there. After the salvage case, she was repaired and resold, but her reputation as a ghost ship and an unlucky vessel followed her. She passed from owner to owner for 12 more years, a ship no one wanted. Her final end was ignominious. In 1885, her last captain deliberately wrecked her on a reef in Haiti as part of an insurance fraud scheme. The ship that had survived the ocean's greatest mystery was brought down by human greed. But the Mary Celeste outlived her own destruction. She remains the perfect maritime mystery, a ship that serves as a timeless reminder of the power of the sea and of a single fateful moment when 10 souls stepped off their ship and into eternity.
What do you think happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste? Was it the alcohol vapors, or is there another explanation lost to time? What story should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Mythic Mundi, and comment with your thoughts. We appreciate your support.